Good morning, everyone. I want to thank you for being here this morning. I'd like to read a short statement. Thereafter, I'll make a few comments and open myself up to questions. The statement: at the heart of American jurisprudence is a fundamental premise that no one is above the law, and this includes the President of the United States of America. The presidential power to pardon is the power to forgive for the smallest federal offense to the most egregious federal crime. If this is true, no president should be empowered to self-pardon, that is, to forgive himself or herself. To allow presidential self-pardons would allow a president guilty of the federal crime of treason against the United States of America to forgive and pardon himself. To allow such would not only place the president above the law, it would make the president his own final judge, jury, and prosecutor. The president would in fact become the law. The United States of America would become a country of laws for all but the President of the United States of America. To permit the president to self-pardon would place the president above the law and beyond justice. Love for my country compels me to file legislation to prevent the president from being above the law and beyond justice. Let me just share with you a brief vignette that does not relate to this president, because what we are attempting to do is much broader and much bigger and much more important than any single president. So this vignette in no way relates to the president, but I think it can make it perspicuously clear what we are talking about. Let's assume that you had a person elected president engaged in a questionable enterprise of some sort. And once elected president, this person engaged in some sort of questionable enterprise would now have the power to not only pardon all of the members of the enterprise, but to then use that same power to pardon himself. No president should have the power to do this, because here's what can happen under these circumstances, unrelated to this White House. That president could use that power to pardon to make sure that all of his minions, all of those persons who are working with him in this questionable enterprise, to make sure that they understand that if they speak up against the president, in this example that I'm giving you, that if they speak up and out against this president, then they won't receive the benefit of a pardon, and they may themselves find themselves having to answer to the law. This is a way by which a president can keep people in check, make sure that they don't talk, make sure that they don't say anything, because if you do, you're going to lose the power that I have, meaning the president has to pardon. And if this is done, that would mean that this president could not only pardon them, and he could also pardon himself on his way out the door. I think that that's just a bit too much. No president should have the power to pardon himself or herself. This legislation that I will file will make it clear. It will take some time for this to be perfected, but this is not about the president in office. It is about all presidents. I do believe that it should apply to this president, and I do believe that there are constitutional scholars who would contend that this president cannot pardon himself. But I think that we have to make the law clear so that in the future there will be no question as to whether or not a president can pardon himself. And I do believe that this will be in the best interest not only of the country, the American people, but in the best interest of American democracy and in the best interest of our republic. With this said, I'd like to entertain your questions.
Has this ever been an issue or a question before the president being pardoned?
Well, it's come up before, but not to the extent that it has now, in my opinion, because we have a president, according to what I have read, who has been looking into the power to pardon as it might relate to him and other persons. So for this reason, I think it's important for us to move forward. We don't want any president to think that he can pardon himself. I think that today we're sending a message to the president. You should not pursue pardoning yourself. If you're thinking about it, don't think about it. we're going to have legislation, but I think also it causes the rest of the nation to start to galvanize its position on this. And I believe that most American people of goodwill do not believe that a president should be in a position to pardon himself.
Have anything to do with the possibility of Russia being involved in the 2017 election or 16 election for the presidency?
I think that this is far bigger than what we're dealing with now. This has to do with a president being able to give persons forgiveness for many of their transgressions and then give himself forgiveness. It is very difficult in the minds of most people to perceive of a president forgiving himself for a transgression that he has committed. This is bigger than this president. We mentioned treason in the press release, but treason is not something that we are imputing to the president. We are making it clear that that could happen if a president committed treason, but we're not imputing treason to this president. Any other questions?
You know what happened in San Antonio, the tragedy?
Let's do this. Let's let this press conference conclude, and I've agreed to meet with members of the press to talk about various and sundry other issues. I'll be honored to do so after we've concluded this press conference. Yes, sir.
How do you go about the fact that if this president were to, hypothetically, if he were to be impeached, tried for treason at the same time, what's to stop him from the vice president taking presidency and giving him the power to pardon this particular person? Is there any rules to stopping that as well?
Well, this rule will prevent the vice president from pardoning himself. But as you know, President Ford did pardon President Nixon. So vice presidents who become president are given and accorded the same powers as any other president. You're not diminished in your authority by virtue of becoming president by way of the vice presidency. You have the same power and authority to grant pardons and reprieves.
Why did you decide, or what was the leading factor in you wanting to move forward with this legislation?
Well, when the debate started to come to fruition about whether the president could pardon himself, and constitutional scholars on both sides of the debate, that's pretty good reason to try to settle a question. My belief is that it should be settled in favor of the premise that the president should not be permitted to pardon himself. There may be others who would differ with me and think that the president should pardon himself, but I do believe that they are a very small minority. I think most people of goodwill in this country believe that the president should not be able to pardon himself for his transgressions, which is to say that the president would forgive himself for wrongs that he has done. And by the way, that would not be limited to just minor offenses. It could apply to treason. I don't think that any president should have that kind of power. I think it's power enough to be able to pardon other persons for their transgressions. And to have a president come to office who has cohorts who may be engaged in some sort of questionable enterprise and in need of a pardon, to be able to pardon them and then to find out that the president is associated with it and the president then pardons himself, I think that's a bit more than the American people will take. Quite frankly, I don't think the American people would be enthralled with the president pardoning people who engaged in a questionable enterprise that the president was associated with. But the president would have the power to do it.
Last question I have for you. In regards to the pardon, do you think he's setting him up? Do you think he's setting himself up for something? And if he is, what do you think that could be?
I don't know whether the president is setting himself up for anything. I do know this, that no president should have the power to forgive himself, to pardon himself. And that's what our focus is. That's what we will address with our legislation. We don't want the president to have that kind of power. The president has an awesome amount of power, notwithstanding this. So we should want the president to not have the power to forgive himself. And as I've indicated, that power to forgive is something that the president has and can use to, in a sense, to intimidate people by letting them know, look, if you speak up, if you testify against me, I won't pardon you. And I have the magic wand. I have the magic wand. On the way out, I can use my wand to pardon any one of you. But if you testify against me, I won't use my wand to pardon you. And if the president knows he can pardon himself, that just gives him additional power to use what I call the magic wand, which is a power to pardon. I think that this is an awesome amount of power. I think that if it is used inappropriately, it can create a fissure in our democracy. It can cause us to have our republic to be placed at risk. So I think that the least we can do is make sure the president can't pardon himself, and would hope that a president would not pardon persons who are alleged to be engaged in a questionable enterprise with the president himself. Any additional questions, my friends? All right, with that said, I want to thank you for being here. This is something that has been of importance to not only me and the people in the 9th Congressional District, but I've talked to people across the length and breadth of the country. I've talked to friends in other places, all of whom have said to me that they think this is a good idea. So we will push forward. We'll produce the legislation, and once we produce it, we'll present it to you so that you may have the opportunity to peruse it, scrutinize it, and give a report to the public as to what we have done. Thank you very much. This will conclude our press conference.